The dusty street of Promise Creek ran with blood-red mud from the morning rain as Gayle Zimmerman stepped off the stagecoach, clutching her medical bag to her chest. The frontier town of eastern Colorado Territory sprawled before her, an ungainly collection of wooden buildings and tents that seemed one strong wind away from returning to the prairie dust. But it was here, in this remote outpost in 1873, that Gayle hoped to establish herself as the town's first female doctor. "Madam, your trunk," the driver called, lowering her weathered leather case to the soggy ground. "Thank you," Gayle replied, tucking a wayward strand of auburn hair behind her ear. At 26, she was neither young enough to be naive nor old enough to be considered a spinster, at least not yet. Medical school in Philadelphia had consumed her youth, leaving little time for courtship. Gayle surveyed the town, taking in the saloon, general store, and what appeared to be a small sheriff's office. She'd come to Promise Creek at the invitation of the town council, who'd reluctantly agreed to hire a female doctor after 3 male physicians had declined their offers. The railroad's planned expansion through the territory had brought an influx of workers and families, creating a desperate need for medical care. "You'd be the doctor, then?" A gray-haired woman approached, squinting at Gayle with undisguised suspicion. "I am. Dr. Gayle Zimmerman." She extended her hand, which the woman regarded as one might a rattlesnake before briefly grasping it. "Martha Hawkins. I run the boarding house. Town council asked me to get you settled." Martha's gaze traveled from Gayle's practical boots to her simple traveling dress. "Never seen a lady doctor before. You sure you're up for it? Folks here can be mighty particular." "I graduated top of my class at the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania," Gayle replied evenly. "I've treated gunshot wounds, delivered babies in mining camps, and performed surgeries during a typhoid outbreak. I believe I'm qualified for Promise Creek." Martha's expression didn't change, but something like grudging respect flickered in her eyes. "Well, you'll need that confidence. The clinic's this way." As they walked, Gayle felt the town's eyes upon her, curious, judgmental, hopeful. Children stopped their play to stare. Men paused mid-conversation to watch her pass. She kept her chin high. She'd faced worse scrutiny in medical school. The clinic, when they reached it, was little more than a small cabin at the edge of town. A hand-painted sign reading "Doctor" hung crookedly above the door. "Previous doctor left 6 months ago," Martha explained, producing a key. "Not much to it, but there's a room in back where you can sleep. Got a stove, examination table, some basic supplies. Council says they'll order whatever else you need." Gayle stepped inside, her heart sinking at the layer of dust covering everything. A spider had made its home in one corner of the ceiling, and the single window let in meager light through grimy glass. The examination table was stained, and the medicine cabinet stood open, nearly empty. "It's perfect," Gayle lied, setting down her medical bag. "I'll just need a few days to clean and organize before seeing patients," Martha snorted. "Folks won't wait that long. News of your arrival's already spreading. Expect your first patient before sundown." She handed Gayle the key. "Boarding house serves breakfast at 6, dinner at 5. You're welcome to take meals there if you don't fancy cooking." After Martha left, Gayle sank onto the lone wooden chair and permitted herself one moment of doubt. The journey from Philadelphia had been grueling. 4 days by train, followed by 2 days on a stagecoach that seemed determined to rattle her bones to dust. Her professors had warned her that the territories were desperate for doctors, but often hostile to women in the profession. She'd come anyway, drawn by the promise of independence and the chance to build something of her own. She was still contemplating her new circumstances when a commotion outside drew her attention. Voices raised in alarm, the sound of running feet. Gayle hurried to the door just as a man staggered into view, supporting another whose shirt was soaked with blood. "Doc!" the first man shouted, catching sight of her. "We need the doc," instinct took over. "Bring him in," Gayle commanded, pushing the door wide. "Place him on the table." The men hesitated, seeing her clearly for the first time. "You're the doctor?" the bloodied man's companion asked, disbelief evident in his voice. "I am Dr. Zimmerman, yes," she replied crisply. "Now, would you prefer to continue this conversation while your friend bleeds to death, or shall I examine him?" That decided matters. They hauled the injured man, barely conscious now, into the clinic and heaved him onto the examination table. Gayle moved swiftly, cutting away the blood-soaked shirt to reveal a deep gash across the man's shoulder and upper chest. "What happened?" she asked, quickly retrieving supplies from her medical bag. "Mining accident. Support beam collapsed. Piece of metal caught him as he was running out." Gayle nodded, assessing the wound. "I need to clean this and stitch it. I'll need hot water, clean cloths, and more light. Can you help?" The man looked doubtful but nodded. "Name's Jameson. This here's Bill." "Well, Mr. Jameson, if you want Bill to live, I suggest we work quickly." For the next hour, Gayle worked methodically, cleaning the wound, removing metal fragments, and placing neat stitches to close the gash. Bill had regained consciousness enough to curse creatively when she poured disinfectant over the wound, which she took as a promising sign. "He'll need rest and the stitches will need to be kept clean," she explained when she'd finished. "I'll prepare a tincture for pain. He should take it every 6 hours for the next 2 days." Jameson studied her work with surprise. "That's mighty fine stitching, Doc." "Better than old Doc Haskins ever did." "I've had practice," Gayle replied, washing blood from her hands in a basin. "Can someone stay with him tonight? He shouldn't be moved yet." "I can fetch his brother," Jameson offered. "And what do we owe you?" Gayle considered. She hadn't even established her fee schedule yet. $2 for the treatment, 50 cents for the medicine. Jameson nodded and placed the coins on her desk. "Fair enough. I'll spread the word we got ourselves a real doctor in Promise Creek again." After they left, Gayle allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. One patient successfully treated. It was a start. The next morning brought a steady stream of curious townspeople with various ailments, some legitimate, others clearly manufactured as an excuse to assess the new doctor. Gayle treated them all with equal professionalism, from Mrs. Peterson's mysterious female complaint, clearly a urinary infection, to young Tommy Wilson's broken finger, sustained while attempting to peek through the clinic window. By midday, she'd established a routine, and even won over a few skeptics with her competent care. She was just preparing to close for a quick lunch when the door burst open, admitting a harried-looking woman with a young girl in tow. "Doctor, please," the woman began, breathless. "It's my daughter. She's burning up with fever since yesterday." Gayle immediately ushered them in, noting the child's flushed face and glassy eyes. "What's her name?" "Lucy. She's 8. The mother wrung her hands. "Started with a sore throat, then the fever came on fierce last night." Gayle lifted the girl onto the examination table, speaking softly. "Hello, Lucy. I'm Dr. Zimmerman. May I look at your throat?" The girl nodded weakly. Gayle gently examined her, noting the severely swollen tonsils and distinctive white patches. Her heart sank. Diphtheria was a deadly possibility. "How long have you been in Promise Creek, Mrs. Daniels?" "Ellen Daniels. We arrived last week with my husband. He's working on the railroad." "Are there other children in your household?" "Yes, 2 boys. They seem fine so far." Gayle nodded, thinking quickly. "Lucy has a serious throat infection. I need to isolate her and begin treatment immediately. The condition can be contagious." Fear flashed across Ellen's face. Is it? Will she? I'll do everything I can, Gayle assured her, unwilling to make promises she couldn't keep. But we need to act quickly. You should return home and watch your sons for any signs of fever or sore throat. Ellen hesitated, clearly torn between staying with her daughter and protecting her sons. Can I visit her tomorrow, after we see how she responds to treatment? Gayle softened her tone. I promise I'll send word if there's any change. After Ellen reluctantly departed, Gayle set to work. She prepared a solution of carbolic acid for Lucy to gargle, created a steam tent with a sheet and hot water infused with eucalyptus oil, and mixed a fever-reducing tonic. For the next several hours she sat with the child, alternating cold compresses on her forehead with spoonfuls of broth and medicine. As night fell, Lucy's fever raged higher. Gayle's concern deepened without antitoxin, which she didn't have. Diphtheria often proved fatal. She'd sent a telegram to Denver for supplies, but they wouldn't arrive for days. Am I going to die? Lucy whispered during a lucid moment, her voice barely audible through her swollen throat. Gayle took the child's small hand. Not if I have anything to say about it. You're going to fight this, and I'm going to help you. That's a promise. Lucy gave a tiny nod before drifting back to sleep. Gayle continued her vigil, dozing occasionally in the chair beside the bed. Near dawn, she woke with a start to find Lucy's fever had broken. The child slept peacefully, her breathing easier. Gayle checked her throat, the white patches were receding. Relief washed over her. It might not have been diphtheria after all, perhaps just a severe tonsillitis. Whatever it was, Lucy appeared to be recovering. When Ellen returned at first light, frantic with worry, she burst into tears at the sight of her daughter sleeping comfortably. You saved her, she whispered to Gayle. She's a fighter, Gayle replied, exhaustion making her voice hoarse. She'll need to continue the treatments for a few more days, but I believe the worst has passed. Word of Lucy Daniels' recovery spread through Promise Creek like wildfire. By the end of the week, Gayle found herself welcomed with nods and smiles rather than suspicious glances. Martha Hawkins even insisted on sending over a proper dinner, since you're too busy saving lives to cook proper. It was during her third week in Promise Creek that Gayle first heard about the Preston Ranch and its brooding owner. She was treating Walter Jenkins for gout when the old man mentioned it. Mighty strange you haven't been called out to the Preston place yet, Jenkins remarked as Gayle rapped his foot. Usually, when there's a new doctor, old Mrs. Preston finds some reason to summon them. I haven't received any requests from the Preston family, Gayle replied, securing the bandage. Jenkins snorted. Well, that's a first. Course might be on account of young Kent. Family's still tiptoeing around him, I expect. Kent Preston. Gayle couldn't help her curiosity. Yep. Used to be the liveliest young man in the territory, quick with a joke, quicker with a smile. Best horseman I ever saw, and I've been around since '49. Jenkins shook his head sadly. Then came the war. Joined up with the Union cavalry in '63, came back in '65 a different man. Haven't seen him smile since, let alone laugh. The war changed many men, Gayle observed quietly. Weren't just the war, Jenkins continued, lowering his voice confidentially. Kent came home to find his sweetheart had married another while he was gone. Then last year, his pa died trampled by a stallion Kent was breaking. The old man lingered for days before passing. Kent blamed himself, though anyone with sense knows it weren't his fault. Gayle's heart constricted at the tale. She'd seen similar cases in Philadelphia, men returned from battle with wounds that went deeper than flesh. That's a heavy burden for anyone to carry. His ma and sisters say he'll never laugh again. Tried everything, parties, picnics, even brought in a fancy singing lady from Denver last Christmas. Nothing breaks through, Jenkins sighed. Shame too. Ranch needs a firm hand and Kent's the only Preston man left. Gayle finished treating Jenkins's gout, but thoughts of the laughless cowboy lingered. She'd treated soldiers whose spirits had been crushed by war, had seen how the right approach could sometimes bring them back from that dark place. Still, it wasn't her place to interfere. If the Preston family needed medical attention, they knew where to find her. As it happened, the Prestons found her sooner than expected. The very next day, as Gayle was inventorying her dwindling supplies, a buggy pulled up outside the clinic. A woman in her 50s, dressed in practical but quality clothing, appeared at the door. "Dr. Zimmerman?" she inquired, her voice carrying the soft drawl of the South. Gayle nodded. "Yes, madam. How may I help you? I'm Eleanor Preston. My daughter Rose has taken ill with a persistent cough. Our ranch is several miles outside town, and I was hoping you might come examine her." "Of course," Gayle replied, already gathering her medical bag. "I can come now if that suits." Relief crossed Eleanor's face. "That would be most appreciated, doctor. I've heard good things about your care of the Daniels girl." The ride to the Preston ranch took nearly an hour. Eleanor proved talkative, filling Gayle in on local history and her family's 20 years in the territory. The Prestons had arrived from Virginia in 1853, establishing one of the first successful cattle operations in the region. "My husband Thaddeus had the foresight to acquire water rights early on," Eleanor explained. "Made all the difference during the dry years." Gayle listened politely, noting how Eleanor avoided mentioning her son or her husband's death. The ranch, when they arrived, impressed her: a substantial main house of hewn logs with a stone foundation, surrounded by well-maintained outbuildings, corrals, and bunkhouses. "This is quite an operation," Gayle remarked as they approached. Eleanor nodded. 30,000 acres, 600 head of cattle, 20 horses. It's a lot to manage. A shadow crossed her face. "My son oversees most of it now." Inside, Gayle was introduced to Rose Preston, a pretty girl of 19 suffering from what appeared to be a simple bronchial infection. After examination and treatment instructions, Eleanor insisted Gayle stay for lunch. "It's the least we can offer for your coming all this way," she said, leading Gayle to a spacious dining room where the table was already set for a meal. As they entered, a man rose from his seat at the head of the table, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and a beard that couldn't hide the strong line of his jaw. His eyes, a striking blue against sun-bronzed skin, held no welcome. "Kent, this is Dr. Zimmerman," Eleanor introduced. "She's kindly treated Rose's cough." Kent Preston gave a curt nod, his expression impassive. "Madam." "Mr. Preston," Gayle acknowledged, taking the seat Eleanor indicated. Lunch was a strained affair. Rose attempted cheerful conversation despite her cough, while Eleanor maintained a steady stream of pleasant small talk. Kent ate methodically, speaking only when directly addressed. Gayle observed him surreptitiously, noting the tension in his shoulders and the way his gaze occasionally drifted to the window, as if seeking escape. She estimated him to be around 30, still young, but with lines of care etched around his eyes and mouth. His hands were those of a working man, calloused and strong, yet he handled his cutlery with unexpected precision. A complex man, she decided, not simply the brooding cowboy of Jenkins' tale. "Dr. Zimmerman came all the way from Philadelphia," Eleanor was saying. "Isn't that remarkable, Kent?" "Long way to travel," he replied, his voice deep and surprisingly gentle. "What brings a city doctor to Promise Creek?" Gayle met his gaze directly. "The opportunity to build a practice where I'm needed. Eastern cities have no shortage of physicians." "Male physicians," Rose interjected. "Kent, Did you know she's the only female doctor in the entire territory? A flicker of something perhaps interest crossed Kent's face. Must have faced some resistance. Some, Gayle acknowledged. But I find people care less about who's treating them when they're in genuine need. Kent studied her for a moment, then nodded almost imperceptibly. Sensible observation. After the meal, Eleanor insisted on showing Gayle the garden before her return to town. As they walked among the neat rows of vegetables and herbs, the older woman sighed. I apologize for my son's taciturn nature, Doctor. He wasn't always so, withdrawn. Please, no apology is necessary, Gayle assured her. I understand he served in the war. Eleanor nodded sadly. 4th Cavalry, what he saw there, well, he never speaks of it. Then to return home and find Mary had married another. She shook her head. I thought time would heal those wounds, but then Thaddeus died, and Kent, he just closed himself off completely. Gayle offered a sympathetic smile. Grief takes different paths for different people, Mrs. Preston. Some wounds need more than time. His sisters and I worry. Eleanor gestured toward a young woman tending chickens nearby, another Preston daughter, presumably. This ranch needs Kent at his best, and he needs. She trailed off, then squared her shoulders. Well, no use dwelling on it. We're grateful for your care of Rose. On the ride back to town, Gayle found her thoughts returning to Kent Preston and the sorrow that seemed to envelop him like a shroud. She'd seen that same empty look in soldiers at the hospital in Philadelphia, men physically healed but spiritually shattered. Some had recovered with time and care. Others had surrendered to their darkness. Which path would Kent Preston choose? And why did she care so much about a man she'd barely met? The answer to the latter question, at least, was professional interest, Gayle decided firmly. Nothing more. The following weeks passed in a blur of patients and procedures. Gayle established regular office hours, but found herself frequently called to outlying homesteads and ranches for emergencies: a child with croup, a farmhand with a mangled hand, a difficult birth that kept her awake for 36 hours straight. Promise Creek began to feel like home. Martha Hawkins introduced her to the local women's auxiliary, which met weekly to sew and gossip. The general store owner, Mr. Finch, extended her credit and ordered medical supplies from Denver without complaint. Even Sheriff Thompson, initially skeptical of a Lady Sawbones, became respectful after Gayle removed a bullet from his deputy's shoulder with steady hands and calm efficiency. She heard occasional news of the Prestons. Rose's cough had cleared up. The youngest daughter, Clara, had become engaged to a rancher's son from the next county. And Kent Preston continued his solitary management of the vast ranch, appearing in town only when absolutely necessary for supplies or banking. Gayle told herself she wasn't disappointed, that he never required medical attention. After all, their brief encounter had hardly constituted a meaningful connection. Still, something about the quiet cowboy with sorrowful eyes had stirred her curiosity, and perhaps something deeper she wasn't ready to acknowledge. It was a sweltering August afternoon when fate intervened. Gayle was organizing her newly arrived supplies when hoofbeats thundered outside, followed by urgent pounding on her door. She opened it to find a ranch hand, dust-covered and frantic. "Doc, you gotta come quick. It's Mr. Preston, he's been thrown bad." "Didn't want us to fetch you, but Mrs. Preston insisted." Gayle grabbed her medical bag without hesitation. "How bad is he hurt?" "Hard to say. He was conscious but couldn't stand proper. Arms at a wrong angle and there's blood coming from his head." "I'll need to ride fast," Gayle stated, mentally cataloging the supplies she might need. "Got our fastest horse saddled for you, Doc," the hand assured her. Gayle had barely ridden since arriving in Promise Creek, but necessity overrode hesitation. She hitched up her skirts, secured her medical bag, and mounted the spirited bay the ranch hand had brought. "Lead the way," she instructed, and they set off at a gallop. The Preston ranch materialized through heat waves rising from the sun-baked earth. As they approached, Gayle saw a cluster of people near one of the corrals. Eleanor Preston broke away from the group as Gayle dismounted. "Doctor, thank God," she said, her face drawn with worry. "He's in the house. We moved him as carefully as we could." Gayle followed her inside, where Kent Preston lay on a sofa in the front parlor, his face ashen beneath his tan. Blood matted his hair on one side and his left arm bent at an unnatural angle. "Mr. Preston," Gayle said, kneeling beside him, "I'm going to examine you." His eyes opened, those startling blue depths clouded with pain. "Told them not to bother you," he muttered. "Fortunately, your family showed better judgment," Gayle replied crisply, already assessing his injuries. "What happened?" "New stallion," he answered through gritted teeth. "Disagreement about who was in charge. The horse threw him against the corral fence," Eleanor explained, hovering nearby. "Then nearly trampled him before the hands could intervene." Gayle nodded, gently probing Kent's skull. "You have a laceration that needs stitching, but I don't believe your skull is fractured. Your arm, however, is broken a clean break of the radius from what I can tell. I'll need to set it before splinting." Kent's jaw tightened. "Do what you must." "I'll need hot water, clean towels, and whiskey," Gayle instructed Eleanor. "And someone strong to help hold him still while I set the bone." Within minutes, Gayle had her supplies arranged. The foreman, a weathered man named Hank, volunteered to assist. Gayle gave Kent a generous measure of whiskey, then cleaned and stitched the head wound first, working with quick, precise movements. "Now for the arm," she said when she'd finished. "This will be painful, Mr. Preston." Kent met her gaze steadily. "Not my first broken bone, Doctor. Very well." "On the count of 3. 1, Gayle gave a sharp, sudden pull, realigning the bone with a sickening sound. Kent's entire body went rigid, a harsh breath escaping through clenched teeth, but he made no other sound. Sweat beaded on his forehead as Gayle efficiently splinted the arm, binding it securely. "You pulled on one," he accused when he could speak again, his voice rough. "Patients tense up when they're counting to 3, Gayle explained, not without sympathy. "Makes the setting more difficult." A strange expression crossed Kent's face, not quite a smile, but perhaps the ghost of one. "Sneaky, Doc. Strategic," she corrected, packing her supplies. "You'll need to keep the arm immobilized for at least 6 weeks. The stitches can come out in 10 days. You're fortunate no ribs appear broken, though you'll have impressive bruising." Kent attempted to sit up, wincing with the effort. Gayle placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Rest today. Tomorrow you can move about cautiously. No riding for at least 2 weeks." He frowned. "The ranch will survive without you on horseback for a fortnight," Gayle interrupted. "Unless you'd prefer that arm to heal improperly, leaving you permanently impaired." Eleanor, who had returned to the room, made a small sound of distress. Kent glanced at his mother, then back to Gayle. 2 weeks, he conceded reluctantly. "I'll return in 3 days to check the wounds," Gayle said, rising. "Until then, keep the splint dry and take willow bark tea for pain." Eleanor insisted on paying her immediately, an amount so generous that Gayle tried to refuse. "Nonsense," Eleanor said firmly. "You came immediately and treated him skillfully. That's worth every penny." As promised, Gayle returned 3 days later to check on her patient. She found Kent seated on the porch, his splinted arm resting on a small table where ledgers were spread open. "Working already, Mr. Preston?" she asked, approaching with her medical bag. He looked up, squinting against the sun behind her. "Ranch doesn't run itself, Doc. Indeed not. But there's a difference between keeping accounts and breaking horses." She gestured to the chair opposite him. May I?" He nodded, closing the ledger. Gayle seated herself and began examining the head wound, pleased to find it healing cleanly with no signs of infection. "Any dizziness? Nausea? Trouble with your vision?" she asked, her fingers gentle as they probed the area around the stitches. "No," Kent replied. Then, after a pause, "Some trouble sleeping?" Gayle nodded, unsurprised. "Pain often worsens at night. Are you taking the willow bark tea?" A slight grimace crossed his face. "Tastes like horse piss." "I wasn't aware you had such intimate knowledge of that particular flavor, Mr. Preston," Gayle remarked dryly. There it was again, that almost smile, a brief lightening of his features. "Army teaches a man all sorts of things he'd rather not know, Doc." Gayle checked the splinted arm next, ensuring the bone remained properly aligned. "This is healing well," she pronounced. "You're a good patient, Mr. Preston, at least when you're unconscious or under direct supervision." "Meaning?" "Meaning I suspect you're the type to push boundaries when no one's watching." She fixed him with a stern look. "Have you been riding?" Kent had the grace to look slightly abashed. "Just to the north pasture, walking pace only." Gayle sighed. "I suppose asking a cowboy to stay off a horse entirely is like asking a fish not to swim." "Something like that." As she packed her supplies, Kent cleared his throat. "I owe you my thanks, Dr. Zimmerman, not just for the medical care but for coming so quickly." "It's my job, Mr. Preston." "Still." He shifted, appearing almost uncomfortable with expressing gratitude. "You've been good for this town. People trust you." Coming from the reticent cowboy, this was high praise indeed. "That means a great deal to me," Gayle replied honestly. "Trust is essential between doctor and patient." Kent nodded, his gaze drifting to the distant mountains. "My father used to say a community's only as strong as its weakest link. A good doctor strengthens the whole chain." "Your father sounds like a wise man." A shadow crossed Kent's face. "He was, until I got him killed." The words hung in the air between them, raw with unhealed grief. Gayle chose her response carefully. "I've heard what happened, Mr. Preston. An accident with a horse is no one's fault but the horse's." Kent's jaw tightened. "I should have known that stallion wasn't ready." Pa was 63, too old to be helping break a horse that size. "And if you had refused his help, would Thaddeus Preston have listened?" A bitter laugh escaped him, the first laugh Gayle had heard from him, joyless though it was. "Pa was the stubbornest man in 3 territories." "But that doesn't absolve me." "No," Gayle agreed quietly. "Nothing ever fully absolves us of the guilt we choose to carry, but perhaps with time we learn to carry it differently." Kent studied her, those blue eyes searching her face as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "You speak from experience, Doc." It was Gayle's turn to look away. "My youngest brother died of typhoid while I was in medical school. I'd convinced myself that if I'd been home instead of pursuing my own ambitions, I might have saved him." "Could you have?" "Perhaps. Perhaps not." "Typhoid is merciless." She met his gaze again. "But I've learned that honoring his memory means using the skills I've gained to save others, not punishing myself for a choice I can't unmake." Kent was silent for a long moment. "That's a mighty fine sentiment, Doc. Not sure I'm there yet." "Few of us are," Gayle replied, rising. "I'll return next week to remove the stitches." As she walked toward her waiting horse, Kent called after her. "Dr. Zimmerman," she turned. "Yes. My mother's hosting a harvest dinner next Saturday. The whole town's invited. You'd be welcome." It wasn't quite an invitation, but it was something. "Thank you, Mr. Preston. I'll consider it." The harvest dinner became the talk of Promise Creek in the days that followed. Eleanor Preston's annual celebration was apparently a highlight of the social calendar, a chance for scattered homesteaders and townspeople to gather before winter set in. Martha Hawkins informed Gayle that attendance was practically mandatory. Kent Preston puts on the finest spread west of the Mississippi, Martha declared while helping Gayle select fabric for a new dress at the general store. Roast beef, ham, 3 kinds of pie, and her cornbread would make an angel weep. Gayle fingered a bolt of deep green wool. It sounds lovely. I'm not sure I should attend, though. I have patients to consider. Martha snorted. Town's been here 20 years without a doctor on call every minute. One evening won't hurt. Besides, she added with a knowing look, young Kent specifically mentioned you were invited. That's something coming from him. Gayle ignored the implication. Mr. Preston is my patient, nothing more. Of course, Martha agreed, not bothering to hide her skepticism. Still, you'll need a proper dress. That green would suit you, brings out those hazel eyes. Despite her protestations, Gayle found herself at her small mirror the following Saturday, pinning her auburn hair into a simple but flattering arrangement. The new dress, hastily sewn with Martha's help, accentuated her slender waist while maintaining professional modesty. A small cameo at her throat, her mother's parting gift, completed the ensemble. This is merely community relations, she told her reflection firmly. A doctor should be involved in town affairs. The Preston ranch was transformed when Gayle arrived. Lanterns hung from tree branches, casting golden light over long tables set up in the yard. A fiddler played lively tunes while children darted between adults engaged in animated conversation. The aroma of roasted meats and fresh bread filled the air. Kent spotted Gayle immediately. "Doctor, how wonderful you could come." She drew Gayle into the crowd, making introductions to ranchers and their families from outlying areas. Gayle lost track of time as she conversed with various community members, many expressing gratitude for her presence in Promise Creek. She was discussing the need for a proper hospital with the banker's wife when she felt a presence at her elbow. "Evening, Doc." Kent Preston stood beside her, his splinted arm in a sling but otherwise looking remarkably improved. He'd shaved his beard, revealing a strong jawline that complemented his handsome features. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he wore a clean shirt with a string tie, concessions to the festive occasion. "Mr. Preston," Gayle acknowledged, inexplicably flustered by his sudden appearance. "You're looking well. How's the arm feeling?" "Itches like the devil," he admitted, "but I reckon that's a good sign. Indeed, it means healing is progressing." She gestured to the gathering. "This is quite an event your mother has organized." Kent surveyed the scene, his expression softening slightly. "Been a tradition since I was a boy. Pa always said." He stopped, the familiar shadow crossing his face at the mention of his father. "What did he say?" Gayle prompted gently. Kent seemed to make a decision. "He said breaking bread together reminds folks they're part of something bigger than themselves." He offered his good arm. "Would you care to walk a bit, Doc? Getting crowded here." Surprised by the invitation, Gayle placed her hand lightly on his arm. They strolled away from the main gathering toward a garden illuminated by moonlight and a few strategically placed lanterns. "Your mother mentioned this garden when I was here before," Gayle remarked. "It's beautiful." "Her pride and joy," Kent agreed. "Started as a few vegetable rows when we first came here. Now she grows everything from potatoes to peaches." They walked in companionable silence for a moment before Kent spoke again. "I've been thinking about what you said, about carrying guilt differently." Gayle glanced at his profile, silvered by moonlight, and I'm not sure I know how." The admission seemed to cost him effort. "The war, Mary leaving, Pa dying feels like one long lesson in how everything I touch turns to dust." "Is that truly what you believe?" Gayle asked. "Because I see evidence to the contrary all around us. This thriving ranch, a community that respects you, A family that loves you. Kent stopped walking, turning to face her. You've known me all of 5 minutes, Doc. How can you possibly see anything clearly? I observe. It's what doctors do. Gayle met his gaze steadily. I see a man carrying burdens that would crush many others, yet still standing, still working, still caring for his family and this land. That's just duty. Is it? Or is it love? Something flickered in Kent's eyes, a spark quickly banked. You ask dangerous questions, Dr. Zimmerman. Healing often requires examining painful truths, Mr. Preston. They had drifted to a stone bench partially concealed by flowering shrubs. Kent gestured for Gayle to sit, then lowered himself beside her, wincing slightly as the movement jostled his arm. Tell me something, he said after a moment. Why Promise Creek? A woman with your education could have found a position in any number of more civilized places. Gayle considered her answer carefully. I wanted to build something of my own. In Philadelphia, I would always be working in someone else's shadow, and as a woman, advancement opportunities were limited. And here, people need a doctor more than they need that doctor to be a man. She smiled faintly. Though I won't pretend it's been easy winning trust. You've managed it in record time, Kent observed. Even old Jenkins sings your praises, and he once claimed female doctors were a sign of the apocalypse. Gayle laughed. Mr. Jenkins has revised his theological timeline since I treated his gout. Kent watched her laugh, something indefinable crossing his features. Before he could respond, a young girl came running down the garden path. Uncle Kent. Mama says the dancing's starting and you promised me the first one. Kent's niece Clara's daughter, Gayle presumed, stood before them, practically bouncing with excitement. Kent glanced ruefully at his splinted arm. I'm afraid I'm not much use on the dance floor tonight, Lily. Why don't you ask your father? The girl's face fell. But you always dance with me at harvest time, Gayle intervened. Perhaps your uncle could manage a very slow dance if you're careful of his arm. Kent shot her a look that mingled surprise with something like gratitude. What do you say, Lily? Think you can lead your crippled old uncle through one dance? The girl beamed. I'll be ever so careful. They returned to the main gathering where the fiddler had been joined by a man with a banjo. Couples were already forming sets for a Virginia reel. Lily proudly led Kent to the edge of the impromptu dance floor, where they swayed gently to the music, the girl standing on Kent's boots as he shuffled in a small circle. Gayle watched, a curious warmth spreading through her chest at the tenderness in Kent's expression as he looked down at his niece. This was a side of him few in Promise Creek likely witnessed any more the man behind the grief-hardened exterior. He's good with her. Gayle turned to find Kent Preston beside her, following her gaze to Kent and Lily. Children often have a way of reaching parts of us adults cannot, Gayle observed. Kent nodded. Kent was always wonderful with his nieces and nephews before everything happened. She sighed. It does my heart good to see glimpses of the old Kent, even if they're fleeting. When the dance ended, Lily skipped away to join other children while Kent made his way back to where Gayle stood with his mother. Not too painful, I hope, Gayle inquired, nodding toward his arm. Worth every twinge, Kent replied, his expression softer than usual. Lily's a persuasive young lady. Like her grandmother, Kent said with a smile. Now, if you'll excuse me, I should check on the desserts. As Kent departed, an awkward silence fell between Gayle and Kent. Around them, couples were forming for a waltz, the music slowing to a more intimate tempo. I should probably, Gayle began. Would you care to? Kent said simultaneously. They both stopped. Kent gestured for her to continue. I was just going to say I should probably check on Bill Matthews. I noticed him favoring his leg earlier. Kent nodded. Of course, doctor's work is never done. Gayle hesitated, then impulsively asked, "What were you going to say?" A flush that had nothing to do with his healing injuries crept up Kent's neck. "I was going to ask if you might care to attempt a waltz with a one-armed cowboy, but your patients take priority." Warmth bloomed in Gayle's chest. "Mr. Matthews can wait for one dance, I think." Something like surprise flickered across Kent's face before he offered his good arm. Gayle placed her hand in the crook of his elbow, allowing him to lead her to the edge of the dancing area. "I should warn you, I'm not much of a dancer even with two good arms," Kent admitted as he awkwardly positioned his splinted arm at her waist. "Fortunately, I had 6 brothers who used me for practice, so I'm adept at avoiding trampled toes," Gayle replied, placing her hand lightly on his shoulder. They began to move with the music, a bit stiffly at first, then with growing confidence. Kent proved a better dancer than he'd claimed, guiding her with subtle pressure from his good hand. Gayle was acutely aware of his proximity, the clean scent of soap, the warmth of his body, the surprising gentleness of his touch. "You mentioned brothers," Kent said as they turned. "Are they all back east?" "4 are. 2 followed the railroad west, one's in California, the other in Oregon." Gayle found herself adding, "I'm hoping to visit James in Oregon next summer if I can arrange coverage for my practice." Long journey for a woman alone. Gayle arched an eyebrow. "I traveled from Philadelphia to Promise Creek alone, Mr. Preston. I believe I can manage Oregon." Kent's mouth quirked. "Point taken, Doc. You're clearly made of sterner stuff than most." "Not sterner, just determined." The music carried them through another turn. "What about you? Have you traveled much beyond Colorado?" A shadow crossed his face. "The war took me through Tennessee, Georgia, the Carolinas. Saw more of this country than I ever wanted to, most of it through gun smoke." He paused. "Before that, Pa took me to Kansas City once to sell horses. Thought it was the biggest place I'd ever see. And now I know there's a whole world out there, but this valley's enough for me." His blue eyes met hers. Most days, anyway. There was something in his gaze that made Gayle's heart beat faster, a connection, a recognition perhaps. Before she could decipher it, the music ended. Kent released her reluctantly, stepping back with a slight bow. "Thank you for the dance, Dr. Zimmerman." "Gayle," she said impulsively. "When we're not in a professional capacity, you might call me Gayle." Kent studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Gayle," he repeated, as if testing the feel of her name. "Thank you, Gayle." The evening continued with more music, food, and conversation. Gayle found herself repeatedly drawn to Kent's side, their conversation flowing more easily with each encounter. He introduced her to neighboring ranchers, spoke knowledgeably about local medical needs, and even shared a few stories about his father that contained more fondness than pain. As the celebration wound down, Kent insisted on escorting Gayle to her wagon. "It's not necessary," she protested. "I'm perfectly capable of taking care of yourself," Kent finished for her. "I'm well aware. But my mother raised me to see ladies safely to their transportation, and she's watching from the porch." Gayle glanced toward the house, where a leaner indeed stood observing them. "In that case, I accept your escort, Mr. Preston." "Kent," he corrected quietly. "If I'm to call you Gayle, it seems only fair." At her wagon, Kent helped her up to the seat with his good arm. As she gathered the reins, he cleared his throat. "I'd like to thank you again, Doc Gayle. Not just for patching me up, but for—" He hesitated. "For seeing more than most people do." Gayle understood his meaning. "Sometimes it takes an outsider's eyes to see clearly." Kent nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I'll see you when it's time to remove these stitches." "Day after tomorrow," Gayle confirmed. "Try to stay on that horse of yours until then." A genuine smile, small but unmistakable, curved Kent's mouth. "Yes, madam." As Gayle drove back toward town under a canopy of stars, She found herself replaying the evening in her mind, the conversations, the dance, the subtle shifts in Kent Preston's demeanor. Something had changed between them, something delicate and undefined but undeniably present. The problem, Gayle admitted to herself, was that she was beginning to care for Kent Preston in a way that had nothing to do with professional interest, and everything to do with the man himself, his strength, his vulnerability, his capacity for gentleness despite all he'd endured. Such feelings were dangerous for a woman in her position. Promise Creek needed a doctor, not a lovesick girl. And Kent Preston needed healing, not complications. With firm resolve, Gayle determined to maintain professional boundaries henceforth. She would remove Kent's stitches, monitor his arm's healing, and keep a proper distance. It was the only sensible course. Sensible resolutions, however, often falter when faced with matters of the heart. 2 days later, Gayle arrived at the Preston ranch to find Kent waiting on the porch, a small wooden box in his hand. "Morning, Doc," he greeted her, the formal address a return to safer territory. "Mr. Preston," she replied, matching his tone as she climbed the steps. "Ready to be rid of those stitches," he nodded, setting aside the box to follow her inside. In the parlor, Gayle arranged her instruments on a small table while Kent seated himself by the window, where the morning light was strongest. "This won't hurt much," Gayle assured him, dampening a cloth with antiseptic. "Just a slight pulling sensation." Kent sat perfectly still as she cleaned the healing wound, then began snipping and removing the stitches with practiced precision. His hair, she couldn't help noticing, had a slight wave to it where it grew longer near his collar. "You've healed remarkably well," she commented, focusing on her task. "The scar will be minimal, especially once your hair grows back over it." "One more to add to the collection," Kent remarked dryly. Gayle's fingers paused momentarily. "War wounds. Some." His voice was neutral. "Others from ranch work. Cattle and horses aren't always cooperative." Gayle removed the last stitch, then gently probed the healed laceration. "This looks excellent. Now let's check that arm." She unwrapped the splint carefully, examining the break site. "The alignment is perfect. You'll need to wear the splint for another 3 weeks, but you can begin gentle movement to prevent stiffness." As she rewrapped the splint, Kent watched her face. "You enjoy this, don't you? The healing?" Gayle glanced up, surprised by the observation. "I do. There's satisfaction in helping the body repair itself." She secured the splint with practiced movements. "Medicine combines science and art in a way few other professions do." "Like ranching," Kent suggested. "Part science breeding the right stock, managing grazing land. Part art knowing which calf will make a good bull, sensing when a storm's coming before the clouds form." Gayle smiled at the comparison. "I hadn't thought of it that way, but yes, exactly like that." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a recognition of shared understanding. Gayle looked away first, gathering her supplies. "I've written instructions for exercises to keep your fingers and wrist flexible," she said, her professional demeanor firmly in place. "You can begin limited riding next week, but nothing strenuous for at least another month." Kent accepted the paper she handed him. "I'll try to comply, Doc." As Gayle packed her medical bag, Kent retrieved the wooden box he'd set aside earlier. "Before you go, I made something. For your clinic." Curious, Gayle accepted the box. Opening it, she found a set of beautifully crafted wooden splints in various sizes, each sanded smooth and shaped to conform to different limbs. "These are beautiful," she said, genuinely impressed. "You made these?" Kent shrugged his good shoulder. "Needed something to keep me occupied since I couldn't ride. Figured you could use proper splints instead of whatever scrap wood's handy." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched Gayle deeply. "Thank you," They'll be immensely useful. Least I could do. Kent walked her to the door. Will you be attending the Founders' Day celebration next month? Town's 20th anniversary. I hadn't planned on it, Gayle admitted. Is it another large gathering? Kent nodded. Bigger than the harvest dinner. Town council puts on a fair with contests and such. They've asked me to judge the horsemanship competition. A wry smile touched his lips. Assuming my arm's healed enough by then. If you follow my instructions, it should be, Gayle assured him. And yes, I suppose I should attend, given that the entire town will be there. Good. Kent's expression was carefully neutral, but something in his eyes suggested her answer pleased him. Until then, Doc. Until then, Mr. Preston. The following weeks brought an increase in patients as harvest accidents and early winter illnesses filled Gayle's days. She saw Kent only in passing, once at the general store, once outside the bank, each time exchanging brief, polite greetings that gave no hint of the connection they'd shared at the harvest dinner. Gayle told herself this distance was for the best, even as she found her thoughts drifting to him at odd moments, wondering how his arm was healing, if he was following her instructions, whether he ever thought of their dance beneath the harvest moon. Founders' Day arrived with unseasonably warm weather, a last golden day before winter set in. Promise Creek's Main Street had been transformed with bunting and banners. Booths lined both sides, offering everything from penny candies to homespun cloth. A temporary corral had been constructed at the end of town for the riding competitions. Gayle arrived mid-morning, having seen to her most urgent patients first. She wore her green dress again, with a matching bonnet Martha had insisted on lending her to keep that fair skin from freckling. Dr. Zimmerman. Kent Preston appeared at her side, elegant in a blue dress that complemented her silver hair. I'm so pleased you could attend. How are you finding your first Founders' Day? It's quite impressive for such a small town, Gayle replied truthfully. Everyone seems to have contributed. That's the spirit that built Promise Creek, Alina agreed proudly. 20 years ago, this was nothing but prairie grass and dreams. She linked her arm through Gayle's. Come, let me introduce you to some of the original settlers. They have fascinating stories about the early days. For the next hour, Gayle was immersed in pioneer tales, stories of blizzards, Indian encounters, and the struggle to establish civilization in the wilderness. She was so engaged that she didn't immediately notice Kent approaching until Alina broke off mid-sentence. Kent, there you are. How did the judging go? Kent tipped his hat to both women. Just finished the junior competition. McAllister boy took first place. That pony of his is something special. Gayle noted that Kent's splinted arm was now in a simpler sling, allowing more movement. He looked well tanned from outdoor work, his posture straighter than when she'd first met him. Dr. Zimmerman, he acknowledged, his expression giving nothing away. Enjoying the festivities? Very much, Gayle replied. Your mother has been introducing me to the town's founders. Their perseverance is remarkable. Alina beamed. Thaddeus and I were among the first 10 families. Kent was just a boy of 10 when we arrived. Must have been quite an adventure for a child, Gayle observed. Something like nostalgia crossed Kent's face. Pa made it seem that way. Every hardship was just another challenge to overcome. Alina's expression softened. Thaddeus had a gift for finding joy in difficult circumstances. She patted Kent's arm. Not unlike someone else I know once upon a time. Kent's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, a commotion near the shooting contest drew Alina's attention. Oh dear, I'd better see what's happening. I'm on the prizes committee. She hurried away, leaving Gayle and Kent in awkward silence. Your arm appears to be healing well, Gayle finally observed. Kent flexed his fingers demonstratively. "Following doctor's orders. Those exercises you prescribed have helped with the stiffness." "I'm glad to hear it." Gayle searched for a neutral topic. "The horsemanship competition must be difficult to judge with so many skilled riders." "Harder than I expected," Kent admitted. "These youngsters have been practicing for months. Hated disappointing any of them." Gayle smiled. "I suspect you were fair and kind in your assessments." Kent studied her face. "You have a high opinion of me, Doc, I observe. Remember—" Before Kent could reply, Sheriff Thompson approached, his expression urgent. "Doctor, we need you." Accident at the shooting competition. Ricochet caught Old Man Wilkins in the leg. Gayle was immediately alert. "Where is he?" "They've taken him to the community hall, bleeding something fierce." "I'll need my medical bag from the clinic. Already sent Deputy Hayes for it," the sheriff assured her. "If you'll come with me," Gayle turned to Kent. "Please excuse me, of course." Kent's expression was concerned. "Wilkins is a good man, tough as rawhide, though." "I'll do my best for him," Gayle promised, following the sheriff through the crowd. In the community hall, she found Jonathan Wilkins, a grizzled former trapper of at least 70, sprawled on a table, blood seeping through a hastily applied bandage on his thigh. His weathered face was pale but determined. "'Bout time you got here, Doc," he grumbled. "Told these fools it's just a scratch, but they're acting like I'm at death's door." "Let me be the judge of that, Mr. Wilkins," Gayle replied, already removing the bandage to assess the wound. The bullet had grazed the outside of his thigh, tearing a furrow through skin and muscle, but miraculously missing major blood vessels. Gayle cleaned and stitched the wound efficiently, applying a proper bandage while instructing Wilkins on care and signs of infection to watch for. "You were fortunate," she told him when she'd finished. "An inch to the left and you'd have been in serious trouble." Wilkins snorted. "Been shot at by Blackfoot, Sioux, and Confederate guerrillas. Wasn't about to let a stray bullet from some tenderfoot's colt take me down." "Nevertheless, stay off that leg for at least 3 days," Gayle insisted. "And no alcohol, it thins the blood." Wilkins looked aghast. "It's Founder's Day, Doc. Man's got a right to celebrate." "Celebrate with coffee," Gayle replied firmly. "Unless you'd prefer to lose that leg to infection." After ensuring Wilkins was properly situated in a wagon for the ride home, with his daughter firmly instructed on his care, Gayle stepped outside to find the celebration continuing unabated. The incident had barely caused a ripple in the day's festivities. "How's Wilkins?" Kent materialized beside her, concern evident in his expression. "He'll recover fully if he follows instructions, which I suspect is doubtful," Gayle replied with a small smile. The wound was relatively minor. Relief crossed Kent's features. "Good. He's an ornery old cuss, but this town wouldn't be the same without him." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching children race with hoops along the street. "I should probably return to the festivities," Gayle said finally. "There may be other medical emergencies." Kent nodded. "Actually, I was hoping to show you something first, if you can spare a few minutes." Curiosity piqued. Gayle agreed. Kent led her away from the main celebration, down a side street to a small, newly constructed building near the edge of town. A sign reading Promise Creek Hospital Fund hung over the door. "What is this?" Gayle asked, surprised. Kent produced a key. "Something the town council's been discussing since you arrived." He unlocked the door, gesturing for her to enter. Inside, Gayle found a simple but well-constructed space larger than her current clinic, with separate rooms for examinations, a small surgery, and patient recovery. "It's not finished yet," Ken explained as Gayle explored, her astonishment growing. "But the framework is complete. The council voted last week to establish a proper hospital for Promise Creek, with you as chief physician if you're amenable." Gayle turned to him, speechless with surprise. This is. I don't know what to say. When did this happen? Been in the works since you saved the Daniels girl, Kent replied. Your skill with Wilkins today will only strengthen support. Promise Creek needs you, Doc. The council's prepared to offer a permanent position, complete with this facility and an assistant when patient load warrants it. Emotion welled in Gayle's throat. I never expected. This is everything I hoped to build here. Kent's expression softened. You've earned the town's trust and respect. This is just recognition of that fact. Impulsively, Gayle stepped forward and embraced him, forgetting propriety in her excitement. Kent stiffened momentarily in surprise, then his good arm came around her waist, holding her gently. Thank you, she whispered, suddenly aware of their proximity. She stepped back, composing herself. For showing me this, for supporting the project. Kent's eyes held hers, something unspoken passing between them. You belong here, Gayle. Promise Creek is better with you in it. The simple statement carried more weight than flowery declarations might have. Gayle felt a flush rise to her cheeks. We should return to the celebration, she said softly. People will wonder where we've gone. Kent nodded, locking the building behind them. As they walked back toward the main street, he cleared his throat. There's a dinner at the hotel tonight, final event of Founders' Day. Would you consider attending with me? The invitation hung in the air between them, significant, deliberate. As colleagues, Gayle asked, needing clarity. Kent stopped walking, turning to face her fully. No, he said simply, not as colleagues. Heart quickening, Gayle met his steady gaze. Then yes, I would be honored to attend with you, Kent. Something like relief crossed his features. He offered his arm and they continued toward the celebration, both acutely aware that a threshold had been crossed. The remainder of the afternoon passed in a blur of contests, exhibitions, and socializing. Gayle treated minor injuries, a child's scraped knee, a woman's sprained wrist, while Kent fulfilled his judging duties. They moved in separate orbits but remained aware of each other across the crowded square, exchanging glances that carried unspoken meaning. As sunset approached, Gayle returned to her clinic to freshen up before the evening's dinner. She had just changed into her best dress, a deep blue silk she'd brought from Philadelphia, but never found occasion to wear when a knock came at her door. Kent stood on her step, freshly shaved and dressed in a formal black suit that transformed him from rancher to gentleman. His arm remained in its sling, but he'd managed to look entirely presentable despite it. You look beautiful, he said simply when she opened the door. Thank you, Gayle replied, flustered by the directness of his compliment. You clean up rather well yourself. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Borrowed the suit from my brother-in-law. Haven't had occasion to wear my own since Pa's funeral. The mention of his father came without the usual shadow of pain, a small but significant change that Gayle noted with quiet satisfaction. The hotel dining room had been transformed for the occasion, with white linens on the tables and fresh-cut flowers in vases. Nearly everyone in Promise Creek had donned their finest attire, creating an atmosphere of festivity and significance. As they entered together, conversations paused momentarily. Gayle felt the weight of curious gazes, the town doctor and the grieving rancher, publicly acknowledging whatever was developing between them. Kent's hand came to rest lightly at the small of her back, a silent declaration of intent that sent warmth spreading through her. Kent Preston approached, elegant in black silk with a cameo at her throat. Her eyes moved from Kent to Gayle and back again, a knowing expression crossing her face. You both look wonderful, she said, embracing Gayle warmly. I've saved seats for you at our table. Dinner was a multi-course affair prepared by the hotel's cook, who had apparently outdone himself for the special occasion. Conversation flowed easily around the table, with Kent more engaged than Gayle had ever seen him. He spoke knowledgeably about the territory's development, shared amusing anecdotes about early Promise Creek, and even joined in gentle teasing of his newly engaged sister. "Kent was the one who taught me to ride," Clara explained to Gayle. "I was terrified of horses until he put me on the gentlest mare in Colorado and walked beside me for hours until I felt confident." "You were 8 years old," Kent recalled, a fond expression softening his features. "Refused to give up even when you fell 3 times in one day." "Preston's stubbornness," Alina interjected with a smile. "A family trait." "Some might call it determination," Gayle suggested, meeting Kent's eyes across the table. "Depends on the application," he replied, holding her gaze. "Stubbornness against necessary change is foolishness. Determination in pursuit of something worthwhile is admirable." The simple philosophy contained depths that Gayle recognized as hard-won wisdom. This was a man who had experienced profound loss, yet was finding his way back to life, perhaps not unchanged, but not destroyed either. After dinner came dancing, with the dining tables cleared away and a small band assembled in one corner. Kent stood, offering Gayle his hand. "My arm's improved enough for a proper dance, if you're willing." Gayle placed her hand in his. "Are you sure? I wouldn't want to set back your recovery." "Some things are worth the risk," Kent replied, leading her to the dance floor. This time, their waltz held none of the awkwardness of their first dance. Kent guided her confidently, his hand warm at her waist, their movements in perfect synchronization. Gayle was acutely aware of his proximity, of the clean scent of his shaving soap, of the strength in the arm that held her. "You dance very well for a man who claimed not to be much of a dancer," she observed. "Perhaps I needed the right partner." His blue eyes held hers, unguarded in a way she hadn't seen before. "Or perhaps I'm motivated to improve." As the evening progressed, they danced again and again, conversation flowing between them with increasing ease. Kent spoke of his dreams for the ranch, of new breeding stock he hoped to acquire, of irrigation systems that could expand their grazing land. Gayle shared her vision for the hospital, her hopes of training local women as nurses, her belief that frontier medicine could be more than mere crisis management. "You see possibilities where others see only what exists," Ken observed during a moment of rest between dances. "It's a rare quality." "So do you," Gayle countered. "Your plans for the ranch show vision, not just maintenance of what your father built." Kent considered this. "Maybe. For a long time after Pa died, I was just trying to keep things from falling apart. Lately, though." He gazed around the room at the community celebrating 20 years of existence against considerable odds. "Lately, I've been thinking about building again." The simple statement carried layers of meaning that Gayle understood perfectly. This wasn't just about ranch improvements. As the evening drew to a close, Kent escorted Gayle back to her clinic. The night was clear and cool, stars blazing overhead in the vast Colorado sky. They walked slowly, neither eager for the evening to end. At her door, Kent paused. "Thank you for accompanying me tonight." "I enjoyed every moment," Gayle replied honestly. Kent studied her face in the moonlight, his expression serious. "Gayle, I should be direct. My interest in you is not casual. If that's not something you might eventually return, I'd rather know now." The forthright declaration took her breath away. "Kent, you don't need to answer immediately," he continued. "I understand your work comes first. The hospital, your patients, those are your priorities, as they should be. I'm just asking if there might be room for something else alongside them." Gayle considered her response carefully. "When I came to Promise Creek, I was focused entirely on establishing my practice. I didn't expect." She met his gaze directly. I didn't expect you, Kent Preston, but my interest is not casual either. Relief and something like joy crossed his features. Then we understand each other. I believe we do. Kent lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Good night, Dr. Zimmerman. Good night, Mr. Preston. The weeks that followed saw a gradual, deliberate deepening of their relationship. Kent called at the clinic with increasing regularity, sometimes bearing small gifts, fresh vegetables from his mother's garden, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy, once even a kitten he'd rescued from a storm drain to keep the mice from your medical supplies. Gayle found herself looking forward to his visits, to their conversations that ranged from practical matters like the hospital construction to philosophical discussions about medicine, ranching, and the future of the territory. Kent's intellect matched his physical capabilities, his mind quick and thoughtful despite his limited formal education. For his part, Kent seemed to draw strength from their growing connection. Alina remarked to Gayle after church one Sunday that she hadn't seen her son so engaged with life since before the war. You've been good for him, she said simply. He's finding his way back to himself. He's done that himself, Gayle replied. I'm just fortunate to witness it. Winter descended on Promise Creek with a vengeance in December, bringing howling blizzards that isolated the town for days at a time. Gayle found herself busier than ever, treating frostbite, pneumonia, and injuries from falls on ice. The hospital construction paused during the worst weather, but interior work continued, with Kent often lending his now healed arm to the effort. It was during one such blizzard, with snow piling against the clinic windows and wind rattling the eaves, that Kent arrived unexpectedly, his coat crusted with ice and his face red from cold. "Kent," Gayle exclaimed, ushering him inside. "What are you doing out in this storm?" He stomped snow from his boots, removing his ice-encrusted hat. "Came to check on you. Road to the ranch is completely drifted over. Took the cutting trail through Miller's property to get here." Concern flooded Gayle. "You shouldn't have risked it. I'm perfectly fine. Needed to make sure." Kent allowed her to help him remove his frozen coat. Power of observation only works when you can see the subject. Despite her worry, Gayle smiled at his reasoning. "Well, now that you've confirmed I haven't frozen to death, you'll have to wait out the storm here. It's getting worse by the minute." Kent glanced at the window, where snow swirled in white fury. "Appears that way." Gayle built up the fire while Kent removed his boots. The small clinic felt suddenly intimate with just the two of them, snow sealing them away from the outside world. Gayle was acutely aware of Kent's presence as she prepared coffee. "Any patients?" he asked, accepting the steaming cup she offered. "Not since yesterday. No one's foolish enough to venture out in this present company excepted." She gave him a pointed look. Kent sipped his coffee, unrepentant. "Some risks are worth taking." They settled in chairs near the fire, the howling wind creating a cocoon of isolation around them. Conversation flowed easily, as it always did now, ranging from town gossip to plans for spring planting. As afternoon faded to evening, Gayle prepared a simple meal from her stores, which they shared at her small table. "I've been meaning to ask," Kent said as they finished eating. "The hospital will be completed by spring. Will you stay on after that?" The question held more than professional curiosity. Gayle met his gaze across the table. "I intend to. Promise Creek has become home in a way Philadelphia never was." Something in Kent's expression shifted. "I'm glad to hear it." "Are you?" Gayle asked softly. "Very much so." Kent hesitated, then reached across the table to take her hand. "Gayle, I need to tell you something I haven't spoken of to anyone." The seriousness in his tone made her heart quicken. "I'm listening." Kent's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, his gaze fixed on their joined fingers. The day Pa died, it wasn't just that I was breaking a horse that was too wild. I was angry, reckless. He drew a deep breath. I'd received a letter that morning from an Army friend. He'd seen Mary, my former fiancée, in Denver. She was expecting her second child, perfectly happy with her banker husband. Gayle squeezed his hand encouragingly but remained silent. It shouldn't have mattered, Kent continued. We'd been over for years. But something about knowing she was thriving while I was still broken. He shook his head. I took it out on that stallion, pushed too hard, too fast. Pa saw what I was doing and tried to intervene. Understanding dawned, and that's when the accident happened. Kent nodded, pain etching lines around his eyes. If I hadn't been so caught up in my own bitterness, he'd still be alive. Kent, Gayle said gently, grief and regret have been clouding your vision. Your father chose to enter that corral because he loved you and wanted to help. His death was tragic, but it wasn't your doing. That's what Ma says. She's right. Gayle held his gaze steadily. We can't change the past. We can only choose how we move forward from it. Kent studied her face in the firelight. You make it sound possible. It is possible. I've watched you these past months, Kent. You're already doing it, choosing life again, step by step. A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackling of the fire and the howl of the wind outside. Finally, Kent spoke, his voice low. I never thought I'd feel this way again. After Mary, after the war, after Pa, I thought that part of me was dead. His blue eyes held hers intently. Then you arrived in that ridiculous Eastern bonnet, looking like you'd blow away in the first strong wind, and started ordering everyone about with those expert hands of yours. Despite the seriousness of the moment, Gayle felt laughter bubble up. My bonnet was perfectly practical. It had flowers, Gayle, flowers. A smile, a real, unguarded smile that transformed his entire face, curved Kent's mouth. In a cattle town. Well, I've since acquired more suitable headwear, she defended, her heart lightening at his smile. So you have. Kent's expression sobered. What I'm trying to say, not very skillfully, is that you woke something in me I thought was gone forever. Something worth fighting for. Gayle's breath caught. Kent, I love you, he said simply. I don't expect anything in return. I just needed you to know. Joy surged through Gayle, bright and unexpected. Then we find ourselves in perfect agreement, Mr. Preston, because I love you too. Kent's eyes widened, as if he hadn't dared hope for her answer. Then he was on his feet, drawing her up from her chair and into his arms. His kiss was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. When Gayle responded, her arms circling his neck, the kiss deepened. Conveying months of unspoken longing, when they finally parted, Kent rested his forehead against hers. I never thought I'd feel happiness again, he confessed quietly. You proved me wrong about that and so many other things. There's an old medical saying, Gayle replied, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Time heals all wounds, but I've found it's not time alone that heals, it's what we choose to do with that time. Kent's arms tightened around her. You're wiser than any doctor I've known, Gayle Zimmerman. And you're more resilient than any cowboy I've met, Kent Preston. The blizzard raged through the night, but within the clinic's walls, warmth and hope blossomed. They talked for hours, planning and dreaming, sharing fears and hopes, building a foundation for whatever might come next. Kent spoke of expanding the ranch, of breeding horses along with cattle. Gayle outlined her vision for bringing modern medical practices to the frontier, of training others to extend care to isolated homesteads. When morning came, the storm had passed, leaving Promise Creek buried under pristine drifts. Kent reluctantly prepared to return to the ranch, where his family would be worried by his overnight absence. I'd like to call on you properly, he said as he donned his coat. "With your permission." Gayle smiled at the formality. "You have my permission and my encouragement." Before leaving, Kent paused. "One more thing. I've been working on something. A surprise for the hospital opening next month." "What kind of surprise?" A mysterious smile crossed his face. "You'll have to wait and see, Doc." The hospital opening was scheduled for the first day of spring, March 20, 1874. As the date approached, Promise Creek buzzed with anticipation. The town council had planned a ceremony and celebration to mark the occasion, recognizing it as a significant step forward for the growing community. Gayle watched with pride as the final touches were completed: beds installed, supplies arranged, a sign reading Promise Creek Hospital hung above the door. Kent had been conspicuously absent in the days leading up to the opening, claiming ranch business but hinting at his mysterious surprise. The morning of the ceremony dawned clear and mild, with the first tentative hints of spring softening the winter landscape. Gayle dressed with care in a new dress of deep purple, her hair arranged simply but elegantly. Martha Hawkins arrived early to help with final preparations, bringing flowers from her hothouse to brighten the hospital's rooms. "Half the territory's coming," Martha informed her excitedly. "Word spread about what we've built here." By mid-morning, the street outside the hospital was filled with people, townsfolk, ranchers from outlying areas, even a reporter from the Denver newspaper. Gayle stood on the small porch, surveying the crowd with amazement. Her gaze sought and found Kent, standing with his family near the front, his expression one of quiet pride. Mayor Henderson stepped forward to begin the ceremony, welcoming the gathered crowd and speaking eloquently about Progress Creek's growth from frontier outpost to established community. "And no development better represents our progress than this fine hospital," he concluded. "With Dr. Zimmerman's leadership, we can offer medical care equal to any in the territory." Applause greeted his words. Gayle stepped forward, heart pounding, to address the gathering. "Thank you, Mayor Henderson, and thank you all for your support and trust. When I arrived in Promise Creek last summer, I hoped to establish a modest practice where I could use my training to serve a community in need. What has happened since then exceeds my wildest expectations." She gestured to the building behind her. "This hospital represents more than just a structure. It represents our community's commitment to caring for one another, to ensuring that no one suffers unnecessarily, to bringing the benefits of modern medicine to the frontier. I am honored and humbled to serve as your physician." More applause followed her brief speech. Mayor Henderson stepped forward again. "Before we cut the ribbon and tour the facility, we have one more presentation. Mr. Kent Preston has something to contribute to our new hospital." Surprised, Gayle watched as Kent made his way to the porch, followed by several ranch hands carrying a large object covered with a canvas tarp. They positioned it carefully near the hospital entrance. Kent cleared his throat, addressing the crowd. "Promise Creek has been my home all my life. I've watched it grow from a few tents and cabins to the thriving town it is today. My father always said a community is measured not by its buildings but by how it cares for its own." He turned to Gayle, his eyes holding hers. "Dr. Zimmerman embodies that principle. She came to us as a stranger, but quickly became essential to our community's well-being, not just through her medical skill, but through her compassion, her dedication, and her vision of what Promise Creek could become." Kent gestured to the covered object. "In honor of the hospital opening, and in memory of my father Thaddeus Preston, who valued healing in all its forms, I present this gift." The ranch hands removed the tarp, revealing an exquisitely crafted wheelchair, its wooden frame polished to a high shine, its wheels trimmed with brass, its seat and back upholstered in fine leather. Gayle's hand flew to her mouth in astonishment. "Kent, it's beautiful." "Every hospital needs a way to transport patients who can't walk," Kent explained. "I've been working on this in the evenings. The wheels are balanced to turn easily on our rough floors, and the frame is solid oak, should last for decades." The craftsmanship was extraordinary, far beyond utilitarian. This was a work of art as well as a practical tool, representing countless hours of skilled labor. "When did you find time?" Gayle asked, running her hand over the polished armrest. "Made time," Kent replied simply. Then, loud enough for only her to hear, he added, "Discovered I sleep better when I'm building something worthwhile instead of dwelling on what can't be changed." The significance of his words and of the gift itself brought tears to Gayle's eyes. This wasn't just a donation to the hospital. It was a physical representation of Kent's healing, of his return to the man he'd been before grief and war had changed him. "Thank you," she said softly. "It's perfect." The official ribbon cutting followed, with Gayle wielding the ceremonial scissors to enthusiastic cheers. As people began touring the new facility in small groups, Kent remained by her side, answering questions about his wheelchair and accepting compliments with unassuming grace. Kent Preston approached, embracing Gayle warmly. "What a wonderful day for Promise Creek," she said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thaddeus would have been so proud of the hospital and of you both." As the celebration continued, Gayle noticed Kent engaging with townspeople more freely than she'd ever seen, even laughing openly at Sheriff Thompson's account of chasing a wayward pig down Main Street the previous week. The transformation from the withdrawn, grief-stricken man she'd first met was remarkable. "You're laughing," she observed quietly when they had a moment alone. Kent considered this, surprise crossing his features. "I suppose I am. Your family said you'd never laugh again." Gayle's tone was gentle, teasing. "I believe they were mistaken." A slow smile spread across Kent's face, the full, unguarded smile that transformed his features and reached his eyes. "They usually are, about one thing or another." Later, as the crowd thinned and the afternoon lengthened toward evening, Kent drew Gayle away from the hospital to a quiet spot behind the building. "There's something I need to ask you," he said, his expression suddenly serious. Gayle's heart quickened. "Yes." Kent took both her hands in his. "These past months have shown me that life offers second chances if we're brave enough to take them." He met her gaze directly. "I love you, Gayle Zimmerman. Your strength, your compassion, your determination. I love watching you heal others, and I love how you've helped heal me without even trying." He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. "I know your work is your priority. I know the hospital needs you, but I'm hoping you might consider making room in your life for one more commitment." Kent opened the box, revealing a delicate ring with a small but brilliant diamond. "Will you marry me, Gayle? Be my wife, my partner, my reason to laugh again." Joy bubbled up within Gayle, bright and unstoppable. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, Kent Preston, I will marry you." Kent's face transformed with happiness as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he was kissing her, his arms strong around her waist, her hands clasped behind his neck, both of them laughing between kisses like the young, untroubled people they had never quite been. "Did you hear that?" Kent asked suddenly, pulling back slightly. "Hear what?" I laughed. His blue eyes danced with amusement and love. "You made the laughless cowboy laugh, Dr. Zimmerman. That's quite an accomplishment." Gayle smiled up at him, her heart full. "I have a theory about that, Mr. Preston." "Do tell, Doc." "Sometimes the best medicine isn't medicine at all. It's finding someone who sees you, truly sees you, and loves you anyway." Kent's expression softened. In that case, I believe I've found the best doctor in the territory. And I, Gayle replied, rising on tiptoes to kiss him again, have found the finest cowboy in Colorado. They were married that summer in a ceremony that brought together the entire community of Promise Creek. Kent Preston wept happy tears as she watched her son, resplendent in a new suit made specially for the occasion, pledge his life and love to the woman who had helped him find joy again. Gayle wore white, a simple but elegant gown that Martha Hawkins declared would make those fancy Denver ladies green with envy. As she spoke her vows, her voice clear and confident, she marveled at the journey that had brought her to this place, from Philadelphia medical student to frontier doctor to beloved wife. Promise Creek Hospital thrived under Gayle's direction, eventually gaining a reputation that drew patients from across the territory. Kent expanded the Preston Ranch operations, breeding horses that became sought after throughout the West. Together, they built a life that balanced their individual passions with their shared commitment to each other and their community. And if the townspeople sometimes remarked on how often Kent Preston was seen laughing these days, whether assisting with a difficult birth at the hospital, teaching their children to ride, or simply walking arm in arm with his wife down Main Street, well, that was simply another miracle attributed to Dr. Gayle Preston, who had proven that even the deepest wounds could heal with the right care.